Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to you and most welcome to this month's Wellington Trust lecture. All 202, 203 of you so far who have come on. It is very, very good to see you, and it is a topic of very considerable significance for this very day, 80 years ago, about which we are going to listen from our guest speaker tonight. The story of Malta that was under siege for 2 years, in fact 3 years at the end of the time, and the Operation Pedestal, probably the largest naval convoy ever assembled to take merchant ships to try and break the siege over a period of 13 or 14 days. But that is for our lecturer to talk about. Before we get to that point, may I just give you one or two of our usual housekeeping notes? And luckily there are only two. One is questions for those who may be on for the first time. Others will be very familiar with this. On your bottom bar of your screen, you should see a Q&A icon. That is the one that you should click on if you'd like to leave a question for David in writing. It probably will be to everyone. You just write it to the everyone addressee, which is there automatically for you. So just type in your question. And Fiona Sparks, who is our intrepid and very hardworking trust manager, will be collecting those questions during the course of the lecture, and if it runs over afterwards as well. And we will get through as many of those questions, and we anticipate there will be many, as we can tonight. But I will say a little bit more about that at the end of the lecture. The only other thing to say is that this lecture is being recorded with the kind permission of Colonel David Vassallo, and this link to the lecture will be available to you. You will get an email in the next few days, very few days, to notify you when it's available. It will also be on the Wellington Trust website, where you can click and access this lecture and any of the previous lectures at any time, free of charge, obviously. But if you feel so disposed and you've had a good day, do leave a small donation while you pass by. Now, with great pleasure to move to Colonel David Vassallo. I hope, David, I'm pronouncing your name right. I've never checked. Thank goodness for that. Colonel Vassallo has Maltese parents, although he was born, I know, in England. And I think I can say that your parents were both doctors. And David himself is a recently retired consultant military general surgeon, so it much runs within the family, who served for 35 years in Her Majesty's forces, I believe in the army mainly, caring for the wounded in field hospitals in many war zones abroad. David is passionate, and by golly will you hear it, about military history, particularly relating to Malta, his home island, and to military medicine. He has a Master of Arts degree in History of Warfare from King's London, and is currently chairman, Friends of Millbank, and we may hear more about what that is, please, David, later on, as well as being an active member of the George Cross Island Association and a volunteer with Heritage Malta. And just to add, as you know, the island of Malta was awarded the George Cross for its utter bravery over those years of siege. Now, with no more ado, over to you, David.
Alistair, thank you very much, and a huge thank you to everyone who's come here today to listen to me, whether you're in Malta, United Kingdom, or elsewhere around the world. So a big thank you for spending this time with me. It is an absolutely special day today, the 15th of August. It's the day that the SS Ohio came into Grand Harbour, the climax of Operation Pedestal. But the whole year is an 80th anniversary year. And for those of you who may not know where Headquarters Ship Wellington is, that's the ship moored on the River Thames within sight of St. Paul's Cathedral. So a huge thank you to the Wellington Trust for inviting me to give this talk on this specific day. Let's have a look. Malta Many of you will know the island. For those of you who don't, it's the site of the Isle of Wight, strategically placed in the middle of the Mediterranean. It has a checkered history dating back some 5,000 years, prehistoric temples, predating Stonehenge, huge history, and great stamps recording that as well. But today, I'm not talking about the whole of Maltese history. I'm specifically focusing on the Second World War, when Malta was awarded the George Cross, and about Operation Pedestal. Those stamps that you'll see there, there's been about 6 separate issues of stamps at least commemorating this convoy. And the last 2 there are from the 50th anniversary and above the 70th anniversary. Operation Pedestal, as Alistair hinted, was the largest convoy that the Royal Navy got together during the Second World War. It saved Malta from starvation and surrender. It came into harbour Ohio came into harbour today, the 15th of August, 1942, which is the feast of Santa Maria, Our Lady, the Assumption of Our Lady into heaven. It's a massively important Christian feast, ranking only slightly less than, Easter and Christmas in the minds of people. So for this convoy to come in at that time in Malta, it's known as the Santa Maria convoy. The star of the convoy was the tanker SS Ohio, this iconic photograph of her limping into harbour, with her decks barely awash. In the words of Churchill, she is famous, fabulous, never to be forgotten. That's why we record her today. And in the words of her captain, Captain Dudley Mason, when he was given his orders to go to Malta at the briefing just beforehand, we're going to Malta, or we're going to try. They knew what was in store for them to get through. Now, why was Malta so strategically important? It's in the middle of the Mediterranean, halfway between Gibraltar at one end and Suez Canal at the other end. And during the Second World War, the outline there shows the extent of Hitler's forces between 1940, 42, 43. You can see how Malta was the only British possession astride the convoy routes from west to east, and also from Sicily and Italy through to North Africa. The person whom Malta really owes a great debt of gratitude to was Winston Churchill, Britain's Prime Minister from the 10th of May 1940. He had a great strategic vision. He knew how important Malta was, and it was his determination, just like in the Battle of Britain and saving Britain itself, it was very much him and his direction which saved Malta. He recognized, even more so than anyone else, Malta's offensive potential. You have to take the fight to the enemy if you're going to win. And as he himself said at the beginning, he has one aim only, and that's victory. And to have victory, you have to take the fight to the enemy. Now, those radii there, those circles, illustrate the RAF range, whether it's swordfish torpedo bombers or the Wellington bombers, which could take the fight even further, covering vital ports in Sicily, Italy, from Sardinia on the left to Greece. Look at the blue lines, those are the convoy routes from Italy through to North Africa. They're having to steer well clear of Malta because Malta can interdict those convoys and sink the tankers and ships that are supplying Rommel's or Mussolini's forces. The converse of that is Malta's vulnerability. Malta is only 60 miles. That's a distance from the south coast of England through to London, 60 miles from the coast of Sicily. There's loads of airfields there, And the Italian bombers there, it only takes some 30 minutes to get to Malta to drop their payload. So Malta's vulnerable. Now, the Second World War began in 1939, but then the phony war was over in May, from the 10th of May onwards, when Hitler unleashed the Blitzkrieg throughout Northern Europe. Churchill became prime minister on that day. The next 6 weeks were mayhem, as you all know. Britain is knocked back reeling, as is France. There's the battle for Dunkirk. And thankfully, most of Britain's army manages to retreat across the Channel, thanks to the Royal Navy. Mussolini, he's been waiting. He thinks he's onto a winner if he declares war after Dunkirk, and he declares war on the 10th of June. Imagine yourself, this is a photograph from the archives at Fort St. Elmo. Imagine yourself as the telegraphist taking down this message, which is sent to all forts and forward observation points around the Maltese Islands at 1935 hours. Imagine yourself taking down that signal. Italy has declared war on Great Britain and France. All necessary depositions to be taken, all leave will be cancelled. That's the Monday evening. The first bombing from the Italians occurs early the next morning, the 11th of June. And Malta, only 60 miles from Sicily, had been practically abandoned at that moment because they didn't think it could be defended against aerial attack. The Mediterranean fleet had withdrawn to Alexandria, and the only air defense were a handful of Gloucester Gladiator planes, which had been left behind in crates from HMS Illustrious, an aircraft carrier that sailed off to the Norway campaign and then been lost. These planes had been assembled like a 3D jigsaw in the space of a couple of weeks before war was declared, flown by volunteers who'd never flown fighter planes before. They had to disassemble them, and then it was only thanks to Air Commodore Maynard who reversed that decision so that they could actually reassemble them. And on the 11th of June, after the first raids, these planes were in the air chasing the Italian bombers. Now, they were modern biplanes for the time, but they were slower than the Italian planes. But the crucial impact they made was for hope, the inspiration, the fact that the Italians could not take this fight to the enemy unopposed. And it wasn't long before Flight Lieutenant George Burgess actually shot down one of the Italian bombers. They have a great turning circle. They can turn within the enemy. So they were able to carry the fight and carry on. But you did need more modern fighters. Now remember, Britain is about to undertake the Battle of Britain. She's kept all the Spitfires she has for her own defense, rightly so, and Hurricanes too. Malta needs more modern fighters. So the first fighters thankfully arrive, the first Hurricanes arrive 10 days after the declaration of war. They land at Loa Airport. This is Ta'ali, but that's just to show you the context where many of them would be based on a grass airfield in the center of the island. So Hurricanes arrive, but that is for the defense of Malta. Remember, Churchill wanted it to go on to the offensive. For that, you need submarines as well as Wellington bombers. Those would come. In the meantime, December, in the clear waters of the Mediterranean, you need small submarines, and it's the U-class submarines which were so suitable. They began to arrive in Malta in December, based at Manuel Island. The Lazaretto Hospital there became HMS Talbot, and that's where they would sail to take the fight to the Italian convoys. That's a painting of one of them returning from a successful patrol, flying the Jolly Roger. Indicates success. It's torpedoed, maybe sunk Italian merchant vessels. Famous amongst them, were these two submarines, most famous of the U-class boats on Malta, HMS Upholder on the left, commanded by 25-year-old David Vassallo. He would go on to undertake 25 sorties from Malta, during which time he was awarded the Victoria Cross, a Distinguished Service Order, and 2 bars for sinking 128,000 tons of enemy ships. Just behind him, but just as talented, was Lieutenant Commander Edward Tompkinson in HMS Urge, DSO and bar. Further awards, it was said he would probably have won the Victoria Cross himself as well on behalf of his crew for his exploits when he was lost with his crew. They sank 74,000 tons. Now, the submarines arrived in December 1940. Italy, in the meantime, was at the Italians were based in North Africa. They attacked Cyrenaica, trying to push back the British to Egypt, and they simultaneously attacked Greece. But they received a bloody nose. Britain pushed back and won a tremendous victory against the Italians in North Africa, capturing tens and tens of thousands of Italians, and the same in Greece. Hitler had to go to the aid of his fellow dictator. He sent the 10th Flieger Corps, fresh from Norway and anti-shipping, to the Mediterranean over Christmas. And the first we knew of it was in a Malta convoy, 10th of January 1941, when they targeted HMS Illustrious. Now, HMS Illustrious was the most modern British aircraft carrier, built in 1937 with special armored decks to withstand the heaviest bomb in existence then, which was a 250-kilogram bomb. But by 3 years later, the Germans were dropping 500 kilogram, twice the tonnage that the decks were protected against. And when the Stukas came in on the 10th of January in that convoy, 6 bombs hit the Illustrious, ripping open her decks. Look at that, if that ship's bell at the National Maritime Museum, if bombs can do that to metal, think what they did to flesh and blood. 126 sailors were killed in the space of 6 minutes, a further 91 wounded. Those 91 wounded would later, on arrival, be treated mainly at Imtarifa Hospital by the doctors, the nurses of the Royal Army Medical Corps, the Royal Navy Medical Service, the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service, many of them with severe burns. Illustrious somehow limped into Grand Harbour, expecting at any moment to be sunk in harbour. Now, thankfully, recently arrived in Malta was a brigadier higher straight from Dover, where he'd led the anti-aircraft defences. He'd created the box barrage. So he mobilized all the anti-aircraft guns on the island, focusing around the Grand Harbour to fire at set heights. And when the Germans launched their massive attacks between the 16th and 19th of January, they were met by a deadly box barrage. So as the Stukas came in, going screaming down onto the ship, you can see the ship down there, that's an aerial view on the left, screaming in, the sky was full, not of fireworks, of exploding shells and shrapnel and fragments. But you have to give them their due. Those German pilots were brave. So were the RAF pilots who followed them through the barrage. Here's that Stuka pilot, but their aim has been put off. And those 40, 50, 60 Stukas which came in their bombs went wide and pummeled the 3 cities around there. That is saying they are taking hits on the left. Over 100 people were killed in those few days and over 300 houses completely demolished. But Illustrious on the right did sustain 1 further hit. Only 1, thankfully, and that started the fires roaring again. But they were put out. And over the next few days, enough scaffolding, emergency repairs were done so that on the 23rd January, Illustrious managed to limp out and make her way to Alexandria and then onto the States for repairs. It would be 7 months at least before she could come back into the fight. So that, January 1941, the Luftwaffe have arrived in Sicily and they're taking the fight to Malta. And they're pummeling Malta for the next 6 months. Fast forward to June 1941, and the Luftwaffe are withdrawn from Malta to the Eastern Front when Hitler unleashes Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, Hitler's greatest mistake. But that gives relief to Malta, leaving the Italians to carry on the fight with their high-level bombing tactics. And also, they're very brave 10th, the MAS, the anti-shipping flotilla, which had torpedo bombers, E-boats, and these small motorboats, which were filled with 350 kilograms of explosive, and it's practically a suicide mission. And on the 26th of July, a convoy had just come into harbor, and these very brave Italian pilots led an attack. The coastal defenses were ready for them, and they destroyed every single one, or captured a couple of them. And the only damage done was to the anti-submarine netting underneath the bridge that you can see in the background, to below Fort St. Elmo, to the breakwater. That is a captured Barchini in Fort St. Elmo's War Museum, which you can visit today. So that was July 1941. Hitler's forces are halted at the gates of Moscow by General Winter, the Russian winter, which freezes the land and the air practically. So the Luftwaffe cannot fly. So they are withdrawn to the Mediterranean, and they return in December 1941, Christmas 41, with the aim to pulverize Malta such that it can be invaded in summer 1942. And that heralds the worst 5 months of the 2.5-year siege. Every month, January through to February, March, April, the tonnage of bombs dropped on Malta, especially around the harbour, especially around the airfields, doubles and triples each month. And Malta, remember, is only the side of the Isle of Wight, being absolutely pummeled. At the height of it in April, almost 7,000 tons of bombs were dropped by the German bomber, the Stukas, the Ju-88s, the Heinkels. Over 4,000 bomber sorties. And there was utter destruction everywhere. This is just to highlight the personal cost of war. Malta inevitably lost many civilians as well as military during the split. And this is my wife's aunt, Carmela, age 33, who died with her 3 young children, Daniel, Joseph, and Mary, by bomb blast on Easter Sunday, 5th of April, 1942. This is a memorial plaque that we erected on their grave for the 75th anniversary. They had been buried hastily in relatively unmarked graves during the height of the bombing. But that's the personal cost of war. not just lives, but utter destruction everywhere. Visitors to Valletta nowadays can still see the bare shell of the Royal Opera House as soon as you enter Valletta. It's effectively a war memorial to the 7th of April, that Tuesday after Easter, and the 2000 air raid. Over 154 days of continuous raids, every single day. The submarines, striving their best to take the fight to the enemy, were being attacked in turn. It was actually more dangerous for them back in harbour, the Lazzaretto harbour, where they were being bombed. They had to spend the days at the bottom of the sea and with bombs landing around them. And inevitably, whether in harbour or at sea, their losses mounted. And that's the month of April. A submarine was lost every 2 weeks. Pandora. Members of the Defence Medical Services will remember the name Pandora as a training block at Gosport, named after Pandora, which was sunk in Malta. And Upholder, David Wanklin, VC, DSO and Bars, lost on the 14th of April on his 25th patrol. And HMS Urge actually lost on the 27th of April. And then Olympus a week later. So the whole flotilla, this remnant of the flotilla, had to evacuate. It was in this time, this month, that's the context, that Malta was awarded uniquely at the time the George Cross. And that's the letter from George VI, addressed to the governor of Malta, to honor her brave people. I'll repeat, to honor her brave people, I award the George Cross to the island fortress of Malta to bear witness to a heroism and devotion that will long be famous in history. April 15th, 1942. That's the George Cross, proudly still on display at Fort St. Elmo National War Museum. This April just gone was the 80th anniversary. It was in that month that Churchill did his utmost to try and keep Malta going. And he asked Roosevelt, we need Spitfires. We need Spitfires in Malta. The Hurricanes are now outclassed by the Messerschmitt 109s. We need Spitfires. And WASP could take 50 or more Spitfires. And if we can get a powerful Spitfire force that would go into Malta, that would enable us, give us a chance of inflicting a very severe and possibly decisive check on the enemy and turn and prevent that invasion. Roosevelt said yes. So on the 20th April, USS Wasp, her first Spitfire run, and that indicates she flew off 47 Spitfires, 47 on the 20th of April. But the Luftwaffe were ready for them. They pounded them, and though there were big aerial dogfights over the next 2, 3, 4 days, only 6 of them were still serviceable 3 days later. So Churchill telegraphed Roosevelt again. We cannot let Malta fall. We do now, convoys were being prevented from coming into Malta by the sheer force of bombardment. So we need to hold on until the next convoy. At the very least, we must have more Spitfires. Eagle, HMS Eagle, the old aircraft carrier, the faithful Eagle, can only take in 15 or so at a time. And Roosevelt says yes. And sure enough, the second Spitfire run, this time with Eagle, on the 9th of May, and 64 Spitfires. And now Malta is better prepared how to receive those Spitfires. So when they land in Ta'ali and elsewhere, the pilots are instantly replaced by an experienced Malta pilot. They're met, refueled. It's like a Formula One racetrack. And they're back in the air within 6 minutes, taking the fight to the enemy. And sure enough, in Churchill's own words, who said a wasp could not sting twice? And the 10th of May is still known as the glorious 10th of May, when the Spitfires gained local air superiority and kept it. And thereafter, more Spitfires would come into Malta at regular intervals. So that's preventing the bombing from getting worse. So sure enough, May onwards, the Blitz decreased. Kesselring made a huge error at that very time. He thought Malta had been pulverized. And he said, you don't need to have an actual invasion. We've neutralized Malta. However, if we just, therefore, instead of invading Malta, we can just starve her and force her to surrender. Because look at the situation. In those 6 months, only 2 cargoes had been unloaded in the June. The rest had been sunk or turned back. They have to come into the Mediterranean when it's not a full moon, with no moon, so at least you're protected by night. It's going to be a convoy in July because the emphasis there was in Russia. So there's no Malta convoy. So with June's convoy not getting through, Malta was very near starvation. So as soon as that convoy only got 2 ships in, Churchill minuted the first Sea Lord and ordered the planning. And look at that, the fate of the island is at stake. And if the effort to relieve it is worth making, make it on a great scale. Absolutely, put everything into it. And the first available chance is going to be August. So there starts the planning. We are bound to save Malta. We are bound to, in one way or another. Let's do it. Because Malta is being starved. Its people are near starvation. They're running out of ammunition. And their planes and their submarines are running out of fuel. And so Operation Pedestal, the largest convoy put together, had 2 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers. There was actually a 5th one as well. 12 cruisers, 40 destroyers, but amongst them, the 14 fastest merchant ships available to the Royal Navy, including 3 American ships, and including the SS Ohio, which was specially, as it were, assigned to Britain by Roosevelt, with a British crew on arrival. And convoy Winston Special was their code name. Winston Special 21 South leaves Clyde, Scotland on the 3rd of August. The preparation before that had obviously been going on for weeks. She enters the Mediterranean on a moonless night, the 10th of August, through the Straits of Gibraltar. But they're detected by this Spanish fishing fleet. As the convoy goes through, it's a massive convoy, as you can see. In the middle, you've got the battleship Rodney, and carriers, Victorious, Indomitable, Eagle, Furious. There was one other, Argus, which had already helped them en route, but didn't go into the Mediterranean. There's your cruiser screen. There's your destroyer screen. The next morning, 11th of August, the convoy's first casualty. HMS Eagle, sunk by very brave Captain Lieutenant Helmut Rosenbaum in U-73. Eagle is hit by 4 torpedoes and sinks within 8 minutes. And that's a quarter of the carrier defense lost. And the valiant Eagle is lost as well. So that's just short of Majorca. That's where Eagle is lost. You still have a long way to go, and you're going to get closer to Sardinia, where there's massive air forces, even before you get to Pantelleria and Sicily. But you've still got the other carriers. Furious has now flown off Spitfires for Malta. So you've got Indomitable and Victorious. And as those air attacks come in from Sardinia, they're met by the Fulmars from the carriers, valiantly defending, valiantly defending, valiantly defending. And thankfully, no great losses, none of the merchantmen. But on the 1840 hours, when the 12th of August, 100 plus Stukas and Ju-88s come in and they go for HMS Indomitable. You've already lost one carrier. Are you about to lose a second? She's hit 3 bombs, many casualties, killed and wounded. She's inoperable, but she's able to carry on. She has to return to Gibraltar. She's not sinking. And so within the half hour, 4Z, which is the battleships, most of the cruisers and several of the destroyers, have to turn back to Gibraltar before they enter the narrow straits between Sicily and Tunisia. So you've had that last attack. Surely there won't be another attack this evening. So the force turns back into this setting sun. So that first phase of air attacks showed how effective the Fulmars were. Only one merchant ship had been damaged. She did sink later on, and 2 Royal Navy ships damaged. However, now with 4Z has turned back, an hour later, the Italian submarine Axum, commanded by Tenente David Vassallo Renato Ferrini, fires 4 torpedoes, and they're aces, every one of them. The first one hits Nigeria, the flagship, then the Cairo, which sinks, and the last torpedo goes on and hits the Ohio amidships. Now, if you're on board a tanker carrying 12,000 tons plus of aviation fuel, you do not want to be hit by a torpedo. Fortunately, that hit, though it opened up a huge hole and set roaring fires, the same hole let in the waters of the Mediterranean and put out those fires. And it's only thanks to the tremendous construction of Ohio, which has a double hull and is compartmentalized, that she survives that first attack. But Nigeria, the admiral on board, flagship's out of action. Admiral has to transfer to Ashanti, destroyer. So there's lack now of proper command and control at the top because of the confusion. Barely half an hour, in comes another aerial attack, unleashing their torpedoes. 2 merchant vessels now sunk, another one damaged. And it's that period of time in those narrow straits where massive attacks that evening create mayhem. And the convoy becomes disorganized, ineffective. You can't see because there's no moon. And then in come the E-boats. Base of Pantelleria in for the kill. At short range, unleashing their torpedoes. So from then onwards, it's absolute mayhem that night. You've lost 4Z, there's no aerial defense, you've lost the flagship effectively, Ohio's hit, more merchant vessels. And that night battle with the E-boats coming in, you lose another cruiser, the Manchester, and 4 merchant vessels in rapid succession, Glenorchy, Wairangi, and the 2 American ships, Santa Elisa and Almera Likes. And as dawn breaks, convoys all scattered, the Italians are aiming to come in for the kill with their battle fleet from Naples. They've set sail and they're planning to come around Sicily, round the tip of Sicily, and hit the remnants of the convoy at dawn. But, and this is where one of the great acts of deception occurs. The RAF have flown Wellingtons. They see the cruisers coming in, 4 cruisers, 8 destroyers, and they drop lights on the plane, star flash, and transmit in clear voice. We've got the Italian fleets, in come the submarines, but there are no submarines at that moment, but they spook the Italians. And Mussolini does not want to risk his convoy, his ships, his precious battle fleet, and he orders them to recall to base. The great mistake by Mussolini at this stage, because if those ships had come around Sicily and hit the remnants of the convoy, addio Malta. And ironically, those ships sail straight into the path of HMS Unbroken submarine, which torpedoes Bolzano and another Italian ship. Thursday morning, 13th August. It's a bright, clear Mediterranean summer's day. In come the first of the attacks, and Weimaraner, carrying ammunition, 11,000 tons of ammunition and fuel, is hit by 4 bombs from one Ju-88. The explosion goes so high, it destroys the second plane coming in. And Melbourne Star is only 2 cables astern. That's about 400 yards, 400 feet. Too close to evade the flames, and she goes right into the flames, turning hard to port. And as she goes in, imagine yourself on that ship. You've seen the ship ahead of you blow up, and you're going into that mass of flames. And the crew at the rear end, at the stern of Melbourne Star, they jump overboard into the clear water rather than be engulfed by flames. Now look who's also behind. There is a destroyer, HMS Ledbury, one of the stars of the convoy. HMS Ledbury, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Roger Hill, had commanded Ledbury during the PQ-17 convoy, which had been ordered to scatter by the Admiralty. Convoy is to scatter, that was July. Ledbury's captain promised he would never abandon the merchantman again. So in he went, time and again, to rescue survivors from Weimaraner. Taking a ship in, wherever they could see people, they passed them by. Those furthest away, they said, carry on, go ahead, save those closest to the flames. Time and again, over 2 hours, they went in, retrieving people, and they thought they'd got them all out. And then one last gap opened up in the flames, and you could just see over here, on the left, a small raft and a young 17-year-old, scullion and galley help, Alan Burnett. And the Chief Petty Officer, Charlie Walker, the chef, who was a water polo captain, jumped overboard with one of those lines, swam to him, and then holding hold of Alan Burnett, the ship reversed at speed out through the flames, carrying them both to safety. 60 years later, there would be an emotional reunion organized by Simon Cousins at the Victory Services Club in London. A surprise reunion, and Charlie Walker met Alan Burnett for the first time, as well as the family and the grandchildren. Just picture that reunion. But we're still in the convoy, and it's only 8:30, 9 o'clock, and Ohio is now becoming the target for the Stukas and the Ju-88s. She's running the gauntlet, and somehow she's still going. In rapid succession, 2 German planes, the Stuka and the Ju-88, are shot down, and one crashes, hits the water at the front and bounces onto the foredeck. Shortly after, another plane hits the ship. And bombs are landing on either side. Remember, she's already got a big hole in the middle. Her back is practically broken. And as a stick of bombs land right alongside her, she's lifted up bodily some 6 feet and crashes down, putting her engines out of action. She's broken-backed, sinking near awash, without propulsion or the power of steam. Could she be got into the Grand Harbour to discharge a precious cargo of oil into the island's empty tanks? So the fight is on. Ledbury is now back from rescuing survivors, including some survivors from Melbourne Star. And Dudley Mason on board and his crew are doing their utmost. They've had to abandon ship at least once already, then come back on board. They are exhausted, hungry. They've been under continuous bombardment for 2 days and nights. The ship is sinking, but she's still afloat. Can she be gotten closer to Malta? Can she get to Malta? So over these 48 hours, left to right, look at that, left to right, Ohio's got a fixed rudder because of the bombing. She's trying to be towed by Penn and Rye, but she's too heavy for them. And then you get Penn and Bramham tying alongside, and Ledbury acting as a rudder and being towed forward, doing their utmost. But the lines keep breaking. The ship's too heavy, but they just manage. And sure enough, 80 years ago today, was a Saturday then, at 0800, Ohio will enter the Grand Harbour. Thanks to the RAF's air umbrella now, as well as the Royal Navy vessels, because they're now coming under the air umbrella of those Spitfires who've been flown ashore from HMS Furious, if you remember. The Lascaris war rooms are modelled on the Battle of Britain Uxbridge bunker and led by the same person, Keith Parks. So the plotters there are mainly civilians, and they're taking the fight to the enemy, and they're protecting the remnants of the convoy. And sure enough, on the Thursday, the 13th, in come the first 3 vessels: Rochester Castle, Port Chalmers, Melbourne Star, which had gone into the flames and come out again. You can still see the red ensign proudly displayed at the Malta War Museum under Fondazione Guertartina in Vittoriosa. On Friday, Brisbane Star, which had been torpedoed and has limped down the coast of Tunisia and made her own way across under Captain Riley. He'd almost been interned, and that's by the Vichy French, but actually come aboard and boarded him, saying, "We're going to intern you." But he's got a touch of Irish blarney. He offers them Irish whiskey, takes them down to his cabin, and half an hour later, 2 very happily, slightly drunken French Vichy officers go back ashore, wishing him Godspeed. And she comes into harbour. And here's Ohio, supported by Penn on your left as you look at the screen, Bramham on the right, Ledbury behind, coming through the boom defences. And here's a famous painting of Ohio coming in. It's the feast, as I said at the beginning, of Santa Maria, the Assumption of Our Lady. A massively important feast, and everyone on the island seeing the ships come in, and they're lining the bastions, waving, bands playing, tears rolling down their eyes as they see salvation coming in. But as they see Ohio coming in, they realize of all the merchant vessels that have come in the past 2 days, she has been hit the most. You can still see the 2 aircraft on her decks. She's limping in medical terms like splints, like for a broken femur. And there's someone on the decks and their feet are in the water. It's so low down. She just comes in. Here's the reverse view now. You're looking towards Valletta, Upper Barak on the left. There's ships, wrecked ships everywhere. She's nestled in enough to get her oil off. And Churchill back in London, being kept appraised of the arrival of each merchant. Sorry, he's not in London. He is in Moscow. He's in conference with Stalin and Roosevelt. And this is something that they can proudly say to the Russians, we are doing our best, we are taking the fight to the enemy. And he cables through via the Admiralty. The crash through of supplies to Malta has been accomplished magnificently. This is the actual typed message received on the day. It's in the Heritage Malta's War Museum archives. The immediate future of the war in the Mediterranean is bound to be affected to an important extent. They have to unload the tanker, those 4 merchant vessels. Every infantry regiment is assigned to an individual ship and they unload the tanker and the ships. Dudley Mason, very rightly awarded the George Cross on the 4th of September. Chief Petty Officer Walker, who jumped overboard to save Alan Burnett, is also awarded the Albert Medal, the equivalent of the George Cross. The fight turns. Malta revitalized goes on to the offensive. She interdicts the convoys. And now Rommel, at the gates of El Alamein, is being starved of the fuel, which is being sunk by the submarines and by the RAF. So 23rd October, El Alamein begins, and he's moved back. And in November, on the left, is Operation Torch and the invasion of Algeria and Morocco. And a tribute by Winston Churchill. In the end, 5 gallant merchant ships out of 14 got through. The reward justified the price exacted. Freedom does not come lightly. Onto the offensive. This is the end of 1942. There's one more convoy in November. The surrender date is put off from September indefinitely. And the invasion of Sicily is coordinated from Malta in July 1943. And Roosevelt says the epic is symbolic. The Epic of Malta is symbolic of the experience of the United Nations. Malta has passed successively through the state of woeful unpreparedness, tenacious endurance by its people and the men of there, intensive preparation and the initiation of a fierce offensive. And the whole battle swings against the Axis. We will remember them, as we are doing today. Every year there's a memorial, the Siege Memorial at the Merchant Navy Chapel at All Hallows. There's a block of Gozo stone there commemorating the Ohio and the other vessels of the Pedestal convoy. Here in England, Gosport, the Submariners Memorial Chapel, there's a window dedicated to St. Paul and the 10th Submarine Flotilla, and they're commemorating the crews of Urge and Upholder. 7,000 civilian and military men and women lost their lives to keep Malta free. Here are various memorials on the left to the merchant men who lost at sea, on the right to Air Force and Commonwealth, 2,301 personnel lost at sea with no known grave. 1992, the Siege Bell Memorial was erected, largely funded through the George Cross Island Association for the 50th anniversary, and formally opened by Queen Elizabeth and the President of Malta. various submarine memorials. On the left, the memorial to HMS Urge was dedicated there on the 27th of April this year. The wreck has been found just offshore, and the Royal Navy sent HMS Astute, a submarine, to pay their respects, and together with the Armed Forces of Malta, at this memorial. And latter is at St. Paul's Anglican Cathedral to commemorate the close ties forged between the people of Malta GC and the officers and men of the British and Allied submarines. Every year in November, Remembrance Day, the Armed Forces of Malta, the President of Malta, all the ambassadors lay wreaths at the National War Memorial, the equivalent of the cenotaph in Malta. And in Fort St. Elmo, there's a very special memorial to SS Ohio, the name board, the main steering wheel. And just look down on the right there, is Captain Dudley Mason. That's in Malta. This talk was on behalf of the Wellington Trust, because on headquarters ship Wellington, underneath the Honourable Company of Master Mariners, on board there's a special SS Ohio display. Look what we have here. There's the ship's bell of SS Ohio and the emergency steering wheel and the aft bridge. Together with, on the left, that painting of Ohio coming into harbour, specially commissioned, 1954. And on the right, are the George Cross and medals of Captain Dudley Mason. You can visit HQS Wellington anytime and see this exhibition for yourself, and think and ponder and remember. Now, this is the 80th anniversary. 20 years ago, the SS Ohio Bell was loaned by the Wellington Trust to Malta for the 60th anniversary. That's Simon Cousins and the Air Malta crew, which flew the Bell over to Malta for the 60th anniversary, together with the medals and over 100 veterans still living then of Operation Pedestal, and 200 family members and Maltese nationals. And that famous print of Ohio coming to harbour, that has the signatures of many of those veterans over there, proudly owned by Simon Cousins, commemorating that 60th anniversary. And was the month later, the year later, 2003, where he organised another reunion, Victory Services Club, where Chief Petty Officer Charlie Walker met Alan Burnett. So I'm coming to my last few slides. In memory of those who fought so hard to keep Malta free 80 years ago. There's the ship's bell. There's the Great Siege the Siege Memorial and its bell. At the foot of that is a plaque in English and Maltese. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. These are the various wreaths laid this April at the 80th anniversary of the award of the George Cross. Very prominent, the President of Malta, George Cross Island Association, the British High Commission, the Malta George Cross movement, all the different ambassadors, and the Italian and German as well, remembering the bravery on each side, who are now friends alongside one another. The talk is labeled Malta GC and Operation Pedestal. I started with the award of the George Cross. Those are the words: to honour her brave people, I award the George Cross to the island fortress of Malta, to bear witness to a heroism and devotion that will long be famous in history. That collage by Gino Gallia. Malta proudly has borne the George Cross on her flag ever since the award of the George Cross. Whenever you look at that, that honours the Maltese people in the most certain manner possible. On this 80th anniversary, I thank you all for listening to me. Alistair, over to you.
That was remarkable. It was remarkable in a number of senses, dear David. One, the fact that such a complex story, albeit it was a well-known story for many, such a complex story put together in such a cogent, clear way. I think that the inclusion of the artwork, some fantastic artists, Norman Wilkinson, and indeed Terry Cuneo,
yes,
who did some fantastic paintings, including a painting of, if I can put a personal note, a painting of Bomber Command Headquarters with Harris at the table, and one of the officers standing behind the table is when I was first married, my father-in-law, who was a wing commander. But Terry Cuneo has done these paintings. He's done the paintings of Lloyd's of London as well, the old Lloyd's of London. It was fantastically illustrated. You have put so much effort and thought into this. Most grateful indeed. Thank you very, very much indeed. There are questions coming in now, which is good, a good handful of questions. I've just quickly scanned one or two, and there's some thoughtful ones there. I think probably I was going to ask a question of you, but I'm going to give more of the opportunity for those who are visiting here to actually get their questions read. Just a quick one, if I may, and that is, someone said that there was a lack of communication between the island and the fleet. This is after the battleship and cruiser force had turned back, Force Z, to go back to Gibraltar, and there was a lack of air cover, and there was a lack of communication. And over that fateful night, you know, a lot was happening. There were losses, and they must have felt very lonely. What's your observation on that as to why that might have been the case?
The straits, those narrow straits, were always going to be the danger point. The Navy absolutely could not risk its carriers. Remember, 5 carriers had been devoted to this Pedestal convoy. That's out of a total of 7 carriers in the whole of the Royal Navy at the time. 2 of its most powerful battleships. Within those confines, so few miles away from Sicily, they just could not risk a massive disaster there, and they had to turn back. So they always knew that those crucial hours were going to be the danger point for the whole convoy. But it was Axum's good luck on the Italian side, unleashing those 4 torpedoes and all creating hits. It was only Nigeria and Cairo which had communication links with the Air Force, and those 2 cruisers were hit. So you've lost, you're trying not to put all your eggs in one basket, but you've lost both baskets here.
Yes.
The Admiral having to go quickly to a destroyer, which is not equipped for all the comms it requires. So there was a combination of bad luck, unfortunate timing. The Germans had, so, you know, just those extra reserves to put in that extra aerial attack last thing in the evening.
Yeah.
And then the E-boats, those attacks. So it's not surprising under those circumstances that the convoy became disorganized and the defense ineffective.
It was interesting.
It's a whole combination of circumstances there.
Yeah. It's interesting that the Germans, or Hitler, obviously claimed that it was a victory, the whole of the destruction of the convoy, but well, it wasn't.
Yes, I mean, one mistake by Mussolini was diverting his battle fleet back to base.
Yes, and
similarly, but the Germans did not concentrate on the Ohio from the word go. They had started off with a carrier, Indomitable, and then they were just trying to hit targets as they could. Yes. But that showed the effectiveness of the aerial defense. They could not concentrate on just the key target.
Yeah. David, I want to thank you again very much indeed. What we're going to do now, is, for those who are familiar with this, we go into account what I call the wash up afterwards, where you can all come on. And if you just want to come on, I think you'll get a message saying, would you like to come on to the after session? Just click on that and you will come in fairly quickly. It should be within a minute, hopefully. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask Fiona Sparks, our trust manager, just to field some of these questions. We will do it during a transitional stage. So we will start off just after if I can have the next slide, please, Fiona. I just want to talk about next month's lecture, if that's possible, if you can get it for me. You're not going to be able, oh, there it is. We've got it. That's fine. I will do it and then I will explain what's going to happen. Our lecture next month, and forgive me on this, David, we always do this at the end of each lecture. John Horton, Order of British Columbia, an Englishman who went out many years ago to live in Canada, is a naval war artist for the Royal Canadian Navy. I had the great pleasure of attending a few months back a lecture he did for the RCN with paintings, his own paintings, that covered the experience of the Canadian Navy, both in times of peace and in war. And by golly, they would have looked excellent alongside what we were seeing today as well, David. Incredible work. Perhaps there's an idea there, John, for you. Because I guess John might be coming and listening this evening. So do come on next month. It's on Monday, the 12th of September, usual time of 18:30 or 6:30. And it will be great to have you there. Usual routine for clicking on to register. If you register already, I believe you'll get an automatic reminder for that. And if along the way you can just help to drop in a donation as you go merrily along, that is something which would be fantastically welcome. And indeed, may I take the opportunity to thank not only so many people who registered to come on tonight, and we had, I reckon, about 259 people, plus the 4 of us in the home team tonight online. That was fantastic. But may I thank enormously those who've sought to donate for us around this lecture, which is such an important historical occasion, with such a great lecture from you, David. Many thanks once again. So over to you, Fee, and over to you, our IT guru, Matt Edgar, who's in the background, who's going to bring you in. So if you want to come in for the follow-up, the questions and answers will continue there, and we'll just have an informal chat. Come on, show yourself, have a word. And meanwhile, if you don't want to come onto that follow-up, just stay where you are, because it will still be there and you'll be able to, hopefully, to hear the questions and answers being read. Okay, over to you, Fee.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you so much, David. That was a fascinating account. Absolutely, very emotional too. Right, so the first question is actually from one of our tour guides on board Wellington, Terence Burke, and he asks, how many of the Ohio's crew became casualties, not just from the original complement, but also those survivors from other sinkings who crewed the vessel to replace those who ended up in Malta on a crippled motor launch?
The exact answer, now, when it gets to the questions like that, I always look at the reference books. There's no way I can remember all the detail. And I will recommend this book in particular, Operation Pedestal by Brian Crabb, which came out in 2004. It lists the individual members who were injured or killed from each ship. It's a very, very worthwhile book, one of the very best about Operation Pedestal. So I can't answer that question straight off without spending time looking through the book.
Don't worry, I can give
happy to email you back afterwards with the answer.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question comes from Albert Azapardi, who says, thank you from Valletta in Malta, and observes some historians claim that the fact that Malta did not fall was a strategic victory for the Allies for the involvement of the future of the war, in that Hitler then had to divide his war effort on 2 fronts, Russia and North Africa, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel and his Africa Corps. He would like your comments on this. is it?
Absolutely. It is again one of those strategic errors that Malta was not invaded at the very beginning of the war. At the time, the Italians thought that Malta could be bombed into submission, and they weren't prepared to invade. They didn't have the navy, the launchers, and so on. So those first few months when Malta was so poorly defended and at its most vulnerable, Malta was saved by the lack of preparedness on the Italian side. The Germans intended to invade in June, July 1942, which is why that blitz by Kesselring from January, February, March, April was so vicious and professional. And Malta, but then, just after that, Rommel advancing actually took Tobruk in the June and carried on towards Egypt, thinking Malta has been neutralized. We don't need to spend forces in physically invading the island. Remember, Crete had been a Pyrrhic victory for the Nazis, and they were very wary of using paratroopers or any seaborne assault. So Rommel thought he would get by with the fuel he had. But Malta, thanks to that USS Wasp and the Spitfires, was revitalized and could take the fight to the enemy. So there was a juxtaposition of strategic errors there. So the fact that Malta survived that blitz meant that Rommel effectively lost the Battle of El Alamein because his panzers ran out of fuel. As a result, they lost the whole of North Africa, with the Americans coming in on the west as well. If Malta, it's one of those great what-ifs of military history. If Hitler and Mussolini had taken Malta then, how different would that battle have been? Well, Britain would definitely have lost North Africa, would definitely have lost Egypt and the canal, and possibly, therefore, leaking through. Hitler's forces on the Eastern Front would have been reinforced, and you'd have had a pincer movement, as it were, through to the strategic oil fields. So massive effect. Hence Churchill's great vision, his strategic imperative. He recognized above all else, Malta must be kept free. Very much right person, right place, right time.
Yeah. Thank you for that very detailed answer, David. The next question is from Malcolm Ware, and brings us really to our own current affairs. The modern day Operation Pedestal equivalent might be the grain convoys from Ukraine. What lessons can we learn from Pedestal which are relevant to the grain deal? And I won't try and pronounce that in Ukrainian.
It's preparedness. We currently, you may think we're living in a time of peace because Britain's not being bombed, but there's a war going on just across over the horizon in Ukraine by effectively a superpower. It's not so much the grain convoys, because currently the convoys aren't at risk, but it highlights the importance of preparedness. A famous saying is, if you want peace, prepare for war. In other words, it's at times of peace, then you really have to do the contingency planning. Think about all the fuel, the pipes that Germany and other countries have gotten. They're supplied by fuel from Russia. So it's not so much the grain supplies from Ukraine, it's the fuel supplies from Russia coming into Western Europe, which effectively we can be blackmailed. So it's grain, it's fuel. So that's the sort of lessons, particularly there for convoys, the importance of aerial defense. If you're going to have any convoys anywhere, you've got to have them defended. Now there's drones and so on, so there's lots of modern technology, but there'll never be a substitute for human bravery and preparedness and forward thinking.
Thank you. Right.
Can I say, Fee, could you,
Yes.
we've got the announcement of the next month up, but it's rather blocking everyone coming onto my screen. Can we take that down now? Is that possible? So we can just go on to the informal bit.
There we go.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Okay.
That's great.
Right.
You've got loads of questions and answers I see in your...
Yes.
Yeah, they're
There's
coming
an
on
awful
thick
lot
and
of
fast.
thank yous, David.
They're like the Axis forces flying over.
Can I say a really big thank you to everyone here who is here, whether they've been in the whole talk or here at this stage. I really do appreciate that. I recognize a few people. There's someone from California, for instance, Roger Walk, obviously people from Malta as well. So a big thank you to everyone who's here today.
And Bruce Lecren, good to see you as well. And David, there's Solmaz. You had a word about Solmaz before.
Now, for everyone's sake, I will say this. I was introduced to this book, Operation Pedestal, by Eric Tierney and Graham Pepper, about 2 years ago, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. It was sent to me by a friend of mine, Terry Hissey. And I realized Graham Pepper, I've tried to make contact with, I found out he's actually a neighbor of mine. He lives 200 yards away. So I went and met him. And he told me that the medals of Dudley Mason were on board HQS Wellington. I had not known that at the time. So thanks to Graham, I said, as soon as the COVID pandemic is easing, I will visit HQS Wellington. And I made a point of visiting HQS Wellington about 4 weeks ago. There was a book launch there commemorating the Falklands 40th anniversary. And where I met, as I entered, Solmaz Kennedy, who's your, as we're in charge of showing people around. And
you've got a question.
Very kindly told me, introduced me, and I saw the SS Ohio exhibition, which was so much more than I'd expected. And I offered to Solmaz, if you want me to give a talk, I'd be delighted. And lo and behold, 2 weeks ago, came a call from the HQS Wellington saying, can we do it on today's specific anniversary? So thank you to Solmaz for being so welcoming to visitors on board HQS Wellington.
Oh, David, your talk was amazing. Like, it was so emotional as much as informative. Like, I felt, I mean, we all read the book here and there, but it was like, oh, your talk was very emotional. Thank you very much. It was such a pleasure to have you as one of the lecturers.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Can I say, Stephen Taylor wants to ask a question. His hand is up. Are you still there, Stephen?
Yep. Yep, still here.
Right, you go ahead, sir.
Waiting for the picture to come up.
Right. Oh gosh. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't have a question.
Oh, you didn't? Well, you were just waving. You were just waving. That's no problem.
Oh, waving at the screen.
Yeah, you got a hand up, which is fine. That's very good. Right, Fee.
Yes. We do.
Caroline. Well, hi, Holly. I won't talk, but just hello.
Caroline Davies would like to know if there are any books or memoirs written by the merchant seamen about the convoys. There are many written by RAF pilots and naval officers.
There are accounts, individual accounts, written by different people, published as articles, for instance. Many of them, individual accounts, are actually held by Simon Cousins and also by interviews held at Fort St. Helena, the National War Museum. So rather than books per se, it's actually personal accounts, articles, personal reflections, many of which have been collated into different books. So they're giving their own personal accounts, as it were, which have been collated by people like, most recently, Max Hastings, previously James Holland, Peter Smith. If anyone is interested, I've got a list of recommended books, which I've sent to the chairman, Alistair. I'm very happy for you to share that.
Indeed.
As
well. Yeah.
I'd also like to say thank you to all the various friends of Millbank who I see in the audience, as well as Heritage Malta and others. So
okay, that's great. Stephen, just a quick note. Could you go on mute, because I think we're getting your feedback at the moment. That's good of you. Thanks very much. This is good. Now look, I think there are so many questions coming in. We've now got 26 listed at the bottom, but those are comments as well. I think what we'll do, let's have just one more question from the Q&A, and then those who haven't had their question answered, unless they happen to be here and want to raise one, Colonel David has very kindly said that he will actually give a written reply to those questions over the next few days. I think, have I volunteered you for something you can't do, David, or is that all right?
I'm very happy to answer questions individually through yourself.
Okay, that's very good.
Thank you very much. So
thank you.
Okay. Very happy with that.
Great.
I've got one question here. You actually mentioned Max Hastings, and this question comes from Michael Gretton. What is your opinion of Max Hastings' book on Pedestal? Did he reveal new information to you?
He did. Every new book that's come out will have the author's own personality coming through and the research they've done or their team has done and putting it together. So every new book is worth looking at. Plus he collates, for instance, further intelligence that may have come through, accounts from both sides as well. So it's a very good read indeed. It's not the only book that I would read. And if you want to get a fictional book, which really does give you the emphasis of it, there's Nicholas Montserrat as well.
Yeah.
It's a more a faction. That is actually my favorite book to do with Malta, because it's a great introduction to Malta's history. But it covers that convoy very well as well. So don't ignore that as well. Okay. I've mentioned Brian Crabb, Max Hastings, Peter Smith. I'll send that list that I've already sent to you, Alistair. Please feel free to share that. It's not just to do with Pedestal, it's to do with military and medical history as well.
That's fascinating. We might find a way of putting it up on the website, possibly. We can talk about that.
Yes.
Okay. Can I just say thank you, David,
Mike
for that?
Come in. Yeah.
I was.
Sorry, who's that speaking?
Mike Gretton.
Oh, Michael, hi.
The questioner. I'll have to admit, I'm not a great fan of Max Hastings' judgment, except that in his preface, he writes, I believe the Royal Navy to have been Britain's outstanding fighting service in the Second World War, which obviously warmed the cockles of my heart. But I'm slightly suspicious of some of his writing, but you are telling me it's all good stuff, and I can believe what I read.
No, it is a very good read, and it's very well researched. It's at times can be difficult to follow because you're going from, you're jumping around with different accounts and so on. But it is a very good read.
There is
Thank you very much. Well, my dad was commanding Wolverine at the time. And rammed an Italian U-boat, but had to go back astern to Gibraltar. So whether it helped the effort, I'm not sure.
Well, it did. Well done, your dad. Well done, your dad.
Well, I think so, but he was 29 years old, and amazing that they had to put on that sort of pressure at that age, commanding a destroyer.
Yeah. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 2 Italian submarines were rammed by destroyers, HMS Illustrious and HMS Wolverine. Went and rammed ships in the heat of the battle. The admiral might not have been quite so pleased because he thereby lost, the use of those destroyers. But the other side is those 2 submarines could no longer threaten the fleet. So
sorry, it's what's written on the can, destroyer. Come on.
Yes, exactly. So well done, your dad. Well done, your dad. And
Peter Gretton, well remembered. Yeah. Can I just say on the book, on Max Hastings' book, a learned good friend and colleague of mine has made the observation again today that the book, which I've just finished reading over the last few days, as I told you, David, the book has actually got some very good original stuff that's not being covered in other books, particularly on the air war. And I think I would endorse that. I mean, some of the vivid descriptions of the Italian pilots were certainly worth recording.
And that is why, if you read the books as time goes on, each of them has the benefit of previous research and things to draw on. And then you're looking for your own new things to add in.
Yeah, sure.
And that is the wonder of that.
Yes. Now, Malcolm War, you've got a hand up at the moment. Is that you want to put a question in?
Yeah, can I add a bit of a tailpiece to my question? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, sure. Loud and clear, strength 5.
I chaired the last maritime conference in Malta earlier this year, and essentially the difference between Pedestal and what's going on in the Black Sea is cyber warfare.
Wow.
And that's something we need to think about quite carefully. And I think the audience will be pleased to know the Malta government has taken a strong interest because of its maritime associations in the whole business of how we protect ourselves from these cyber attacks, of which there have been a lot, by the way, in the Black Sea, and not a lot of them have been broadcast as a result of how they've gone about. So that was a tailpiece, I think, to my question. The idea to look ahead, but there are lots of lessons, as David pointed out. The big one, of course, was the determination of people in Operation Pedestal, particularly Churchill, to pursue something which many people said couldn't be achieved. And I think that's something we need to learn from for the future as well.
Absolutely. It was the equivalent of, at the beginning, I recommended, you remember Churchill? I showed him front cover on a book by Douglas Austin. It's his strategy, it's strategic leadership, the absolute determination. It's what saved Britain, let alone Malta. It's very much against all odds, no matter how hard. As he said, the aim is victory. In one word, victory, victory, victory. That's what we will strive for. And Dudley Mason said, we're going to Malta, or we're going to try. And never was a truer word.
Yeah.
Anyway, if people want to listen in, I've got all the details of Maritime Week in October, which Laurent Gonzi, you will know him, David.
Oh, yes.
Prime Minister, he's articulating. So that topic will come up in the context I've just tried to illustrate, which I think will be quite important.
Please share that if you don't mind. I'd love to know more about that.
I was going to say, if you could do that for us as well, Malcolm, that'd be great for the trust.
Yeah. Enough from me. Thanks very much, everybody.
That's great. I want to just raise a question here. Holly, it's lovely to see you, but this is, we have so many people on here. I'm going to keep this.
I know.
We'll have a longer talk next month, but I hope you're well. You look good.
Yeah.
Now, look, can I go across the other side of the pond to our good friends in the States and Canada and South America? How is this particular Operation Pedestal, bearing in mind that there were American ships on board, and indeed there were decorated American mariners, the guys who finished up on the Ohio, who'd been on the, I think on the Like, is it the
Like?
That's right, sure. There were two guys there, and they're in the book with their having been decorated. What is the American sort of perception still? Is it remembered, or is this a forgotten expedition? I don't know whether there's anybody who can answer.
There's Roger Walk in California, who I first met in Malta.
Yeah, David recruited me in Malta. I'm actually in Maryland, not California.
Okay.
All right.
I knew a little bit, a fair amount about the American side. The Malta side was relatively new, not completely unknown, but relatively new. And I've been trying to bury myself in Malta history, both its prehistory and full history, as well as its role in World War II. And I've been following David's guidance on some of this. And thank you very much. I do want to ask one thing. David, could you speak about your work in Malta on RAMC archives?
Okay.
Yeah.
I mentioned that at the beginning, besides being an active member of the GCIA, George Cross Island Association, I'm also a volunteer. Whenever I go on to Malta, we've still got family there. I spend several days at the archives of the National War Museum, courtesy of Heritage Malta. They've received donations over the years from Pedestal and other veterans or families and they're still very much open to receiving those because it helps expand their war museum. It helps expand the story. And I'm helping to catalogue those archives. It's not just the Royal Army Medical Corps, it's the Royal Malta Artillery, King's Own Malta Regiment, all the different infantry regiments, the ships, the Air Force. These had originally, many of these had been donated to the National War Museum Association when it was set up at Fort St. Elmo over the last 30 years, you know, starting in the 70s. So it's carrying on that that tradition, as it were, of people volunteering. The museums in Malta, many of them are run by volunteers. They rely heavily on volunteers, and to make it even better, they rely on the donations, not so much monetary, but actual material. Those materials on display at the SS Ohio exhibition at Fort St. Elmo were donated. So if anyone's up in the attic of your houses, you've got old records, anything to do with the Siege of Malta, there's a very welcome, there's a great welcome by Heritage Malta, also from Fondazione Wetartna for that.
I want to begin to round up now, and what I particularly want to say is thank you to all our Maltese friends here, and those who I believe might be even here from the Malta High Commission, the Maltese High Commission, but certainly I can see Maltese names everywhere. I'm very warmed by that, not least because David's family is here, which is terrific. But also my wife was born in Malta in 1950. I think it was in the convent of the Blue Nun, David. So I think it was opposite one of your family homes. Was that right?
Yes, our family home was just opposite the Blue Sisters, the Blue Nuns.
Yeah.
And some of my sisters and brother were born exactly the same hospital where your wife was born.
Well, there we are. That's fantastic. And we're hoping to get out there in the next 12 months. Anyway, I've never been before, so we had to be there. So welcome to all you, and I do hope we'll see you back on some of our other lectures. I also would like to say again, great thanks to those who have come in. Ted, I've got to mention you as well, because you never sleep on the second Monday in the month, because you're down in New South Wales, in Sydney. But it's great of you to be on again, Ted. But also those from the other side, some of our old friends from the States and Canada, and also Rear Admiral Caspar Donovan. I think this is your first time on Royal Canadian Navy, retired Admiral. It's great to have you on as well. And so I can go on, but nobody wants to listen to me whittle on anymore.
Oh, yes, we do.
Oh, well, no, not at all. Not at all. So I'm just going to say once again, David, you've done a fantastic job. Go and have go and have a great night's sleep. Back in Suffolk here many years ago, my next door neighbor say, "You won't need no rocking tonight."
I just wanted to say a really special thanks to you, Alistair, Solmaz, Fiona, Matt, for inviting me. A big thank you to everyone who's put comments on the Q&As. I've been looking through them as well, and to everyone who's attended. You've got some really generous comments, and thank you ever so much.
It's really great.
Important. It's so important to remember those who fought to keep Malta free. It's the same lessons nowadays. Freedom is so important.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whether it's Ukraine now or anywhere else.
Absolutely.
That sort of lesson is so important. That's the overriding thing. So thank you to all. We shall
Thank you again. We shall have you back to talk again.
Thank you, David.
David, thank you.
Well done. Thank you. And you, Holly. See you next month. Everyone,
See you all next month.
See you
Stay
next
well.
month. Richard, we must have a separate call. I'll give you a call on the phone sometime, not tonight, another time. Richard Shuttleworth. Yeah, I'll give you a call. We haven't caught up lately. Very good. Farewell to you all. Drop off at leisure as you like, and I'll close the door and throw away the key when you've all gone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Very
you.
good.
Much
Bye-bye.
appreciated.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Stay well, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thanks a
Bye.
million.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
God bless you all.
Bye, Doctor. Bye,
God
Dr.
bless you
David.
all too.
Thank you, David.
Malta. God bless Malta too.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
Very
so
good.
nice.
Much appreciated.
God bless you.